So the three levels of formality of dress, they are most visible in female dress. We'll talk about it a little bit later on why. Gender roles, basically gender roles in the society. So there are three levels: the undress, the half dress, and the full dress, and they correspond to the morning, day, and evening. Paradoxically, the undress, which was worn in the morning, was the most covering of the types. It had the highest neckline, it had the longest sleeves, it had other characteristics, we'll talk about it in a moment. The day dress, or the half dress, was the most varied of the types. And as the century progresses, you have more and more different types of half dress for specific occasions, for specific pursuit. Whether you go visiting or walking or riding in a carriage, all kinds of sporting clothes fall into this category. So as far as, let's say, covering the skin, they are somewhere in the middle. Usually long or half length sleeves, usually some sort of décolletage, so the front of the dress was cut. Sometimes it was covered by the underwear. The most important thing would be the accessories here. We'll talk about them in a moment. Then the full dress worn in the evening. Again, there are a few subtypes depending on the formality of the evening occasion. So you would wear, if you could afford it, a slightly different evening dress for a dinner, and another one for, let's say, a theater outing, and yet another one, perhaps more elaborate and expensive, for a ball with dancing. The most formal type of the full dress would be worn at the presentation ceremony at court. So it would not only be the rules of social etiquette, but also the rules of court protocol. Let's now talk a little bit about the undress, so the kind of garments worn in the morning. They are mostly visible in female clothes and also perhaps to some extent children's clothes, but not so much in men's clothes. There is a notion of male undress, but not many men are often seen wearing that, because in the morning most men basically went out to work, so they didn't stay at home, and the morning dress was worn by a woman before she left the house. So this was worn in your own home by a hostess. So this was the kind of clothes that you would normally wear for breakfast. So when you got up, got out of bed, removed your nightgown, you would normally wear the undress for breakfast. What is important, it was quite covering for warmth only. Well, the Victorian homes were usually quite cold, and people were economical with heating because it was quite expensive and labor intensive to clean all those fireplaces. So it was more practical to cover yourself with another layer of clothing. So they are almost always, they have long sleeves and high neck. Sometimes they are called a wrapper because they are like a dressing gown. They were a bit more formal than today's dressing gowns, really, or bathing gowns. But they were more comfortable and easier and definitely less formal than any other type of clothes. This was the kind of gown that you would not need anyone's help to put on. And sometimes, in most cases, not always, if you chose, you could wear this kind of dress without a corset. This is especially important from the 20s onwards, so from the Romantic period onwards, when the fashion really dictates that corsets are necessary, and not only the kind of soft corsets of the early 19th century, but more structured, boned corsets that would change the figure into a fashionable shape. You could wear the morning clothes, the undress, without the corset. Many ladies wore the corset well, when they started dressing up for the day. One of the first things, not the first, we'll talk about the underwear in a little moment, was the corset. So this is what they would put on. This idea of a loose, long wrapper, very often it was worn with indoor cap, especially in the first half of the century. It had very little decoration. No jewelry was normally worn with it, and the shoes could be quite simple. There might be a little trimming of the collar. Generally, it would follow the style. So if we look at the illustrations, you will notice that these clothes also follow the style. So you have the elevated waistlines in the neoclassical period. You have this very accentuated hourglass shape in the Romantic period, and then in the Victorian period, the shape of the bodice, the shape of the skirt is very often the same. Sometimes the fashion plates indicate that this is a morning dress if you could not observe it from the shape and the accessories and the long sleeves and high collar thing. By showing the women dressed in such clothes engaged in some sort of indoor, private, family occupations, like minding the babies. They are often seen with children, or drinking tea or coffee or chocolate for breakfast, or sometimes writing letters. This was something that many women did in the morning, like checking the email today. They would just sit down and sort out the correspondence, and in the 19th century many people and many women exchanged the letters. So you see these things. They very often wear indoor caps. In the neoclassical period, it's almost always. And another type of popular way of indicating that this is a morning dress is to show a situation between a hostess and a female guest. So if the woman received a visitor, if it was a close friend or a relative, she could do it wearing the undress. So we would see, this is a good way to really compare the day dress with the morning dress. The morning dress is usually more comfortable, easier, less structured, less tailored, less restrictive to the movement. Very often you would see the hostess wearing an indoor cap, while the guest comes wearing a bonnet, and she comes wearing day clothes because she had to go out of doors. Of course, she wouldn't be running the streets wearing her undress. So that's what we have here in the Romantic period, in the Victorian period, This is a good indication that really makes you notice that the style is the same. It's really the details and the practical considerations that make you distinguish between the undress worn by the hostess and the half-dress worn by the guest. Towards the end of the 19th century, the morning clothes, the undress clothes, become more sophisticated because they are acceptable for a bit longer, so a lady could wear them in her own home for as long as she was not going out, even until dinner. Then she would change for dinner, but she could even have a tea with her friends wearing a version of the undress called a tea gown. They become very popular towards the end of the 19th century, and especially in the Belle Epoque period, they become probably the most comfortable and the most easy to wear clothes. They could be worn without a corset. They would be worn only by married ladies because it was assumed that they were potentially too dangerous for the morality of unmarried women, because they could be taken off and put on too quickly. So if she had a tryst with her lover, she could undress too quickly. No respectable unmarried lady would wear a dressing gown or a tea gown or an at-home gown, as they were called. If you look at the photographs of the dressing gowns from the 70s and the Belle Epoque, you can see that they are quite ornate and still very feminine in a traditional way. But they are visibly less structured than the clothes worn during the day. So that's the situation about the undress, and now we move to the half dress in a moment. Hallo.